Is it true that Taehyung's tears are not just from longing? Why did Jimin suddenly explode and expose Jungkook's dark past? What really happened on their way back to the military camp until a violent altercation broke out that could not be prevented? Did Jungkook really intend to betray Taehyung? The army was silent, shocked, and still could not accept this fact. Shocking facts finally come to light, and it all starts with one emotional conversation that never should have happened. They return to the same place, but the world they carry in their hearts is already much different. As Taehyung steps heavily behind Jungkook, no one knows that his smile that afternoon holds something more bitter than betrayal. And none of the army could have guessed that on the way to the military camp, there would be a moment that would tear feelings apart, shake the foundations of BTS's friendship, and make Jimin, a figure known for being calm and protective, turn into someone who is angry, loud, and no longer able to withstand old wounds that are too deep. What exactly happened? Why did all this start with Taehyung crying? Why is Jungkook, who has been considered the most loyal golden brother, in the midst of a storm of accusations from Jimin himself? And even more surprising, is it true that Jungkook has a dark past that has been hidden from all the members, especially from Taehyung? No Wind, No Rain, a short 17-second video leaked among the army in the early hours of the morning. Jimin's figure was seen looking down at one corner of the training camp corridor. His face was bright red, and his eyes were puffy. Opposite him, a voice similar to Jungkook's sounded faint but full of tension. "It's not what you think, Hyung." Behind the wall, there was a shadow army. Taehyung knew very well. "Shut up. It's not moving." But if you look more closely, the shoulders tremble. "Cry." And this is where it all began. Jimin, who had chosen to remain silent despite seeing Jungkook's behavior change many times, finally exploded. He refused to sit together during their first dinner session at the camp. He stared intently at Jungkook, then put down his chopsticks and said in a tone that had never been heard from Jimin's mouth before, "That's enough. I can't keep pretending I don't know." They all fell silent. Even the usually resolute military staff held back. Jin, who was present that night as a liaison between the management and the military, simply lowered his head. RM held his head. Suga was silent. Only Taehyung finally looked up and said quietly, "Hyung, what do you mean?" Jimin did not answer directly. He stood up and left. But that night, for the first time since BTS began their military journey, there was a tension that couldn't be explained in words. And the next day, the secret that had been hidden was finally spoken, with tears and anger, by Jimin himself. "The army should know," he said, holding back a sob. "Everyone should know. All this time, you've only seen Jungkook's sweet side. But I know what happened before we got back to camp. I know whose message he ignored. And I know who he secretly destroyed." Suddenly, everyone frowned. Jimin is not finished. "You know why Taehyung hasn't spoken much since we arrived? Do you know why he cried that night on the hill behind the barracks? Because he realized something he never even wanted to think about, that the best friend he trusted the most was hiding something from him. And this is the moment that changes everything. Jimin reveals that before they returned to camp, Taehyung and Jungkook actually had a personal agreement. Taehyung, who had experienced a mild emotional breakdown due to the pressure of HYB's sudden comeback, asked for one simple thing from Jungkook: "Don't leave me alone." Jungkook replied with a hug and a promise that he would always be by his side. But the opposite happened. Jungkook, unbeknownst to Taehyung, meets with management to discuss a possible solo promotion even in the midst of military service. He came up with the idea for a collaboration with an outside artist, and even once said that right now there are no other members who can accompany me professionally. Those words, according to Jimin, who heard directly from one of HYB's staff, were the biggest blow to Taehyung. Not because of work, but because of trust. The trust they had built since they were trainees when they slept in a small room together, encouraging each other and promising each other that no matter how big they became, they would never leave each other. And all that was ruined by one silent decision. When I confronted Jungkook about this, he just said he didn't want to make a drama, Jimin said. But it's not about drama. It's about promises. It's about Taehyung. Taehyung, who has been holding everything back, finally can no longer pretend.
It exploded that night.
He hit the wall, left the dining room, and did not return for 3 hours. When he was finally found, he was sitting alone in the rain, wearing the same black hoodie he wore when he first entered Big Hit. And when the genie hugged him to take him back into the barracks, only one sentence came out of his mouth. Why did he change so quickly? The same question is now echoing in the hearts of millions of ARMY. Does fame really change a person? Does Jungkook, nicknamed the Golden Magne, really put his ambition above friendship? And is Jimin, the only member who still speaks up, now going to be targeted for his honesty? In the next training session, Jungkook tries to get close to Taehyung. But Taehyung just looked at her and said, "I don't know who you are right now." Jungkook looked devastated, but didn't argue. He said quietly, "I just want us to stay strong." But is that enough? The next day, a mysterious letter is found in Jimin's room. It is not known who wrote it, but the content is clearly addressed to Jungkook. What's the point of being a star if you destroy the only light that always believed in you? The ARMY is now divided. Some supported Jimin for his courage. Some defended Jungkook, believing he was innocent and merely the victim of a misunderstanding. But all agreed that this is the first time BTS has faced an internal storm that not even any camera can hide. Meanwhile, HYB remained silent. There is no clarification. There is no official statement. Even Taehyung, who is usually active on social media, deleted all posts related to the training period. He left only one sentence in his bio. Some wounds just don't heal with time. And the ARMY could only wonder, was this wound the beginning of the end, or just a pause before repair? Is this proof that even the strongest relationships can crack under stress? Or will this be the story that ultimately makes them stronger than ever? But before we can answer all of that, one thing remains a mystery. What really happened in the car on the way to camp that night? What did Jungkook say to Taehyung when they were just the two of them? And why did Jimin know so much, but chose silence all this time? One thing is certain. The evening was not just about a physical trip to a military camp. It is an emotional journey to the truth, which not everyone is ready to accept. And now, the whole world awaits. Will Jungkook finally speak? Or is his silence the deepest confession that can never be put into words? The atmosphere in the military camp is no longer the same. Since that night, every step, every look, every smile that used to feel warm has now turned into a question mark. ARMY, who used to believe that BTS was a solid house, is now starting to feel the shaking in its foundation. But behind it all, there's still a big puzzle that hasn't been revealed. What exactly is Jungkook's past that Jimin unravels? And why was the dismantling painful not only for Taehyung, but also for Jimin himself? The fourth night since the incident became an unforgettable moment. All the members were gathered in one small room by military representatives for a team reflection session. Usually, this session is only filled with light jokes, reminders of encouragement, and words of mutual support. But that night, no one laughed. No one responded. Only silence. Silence and a sense of tension can be cut with a knife. Jimin, who was sitting on the edge of the chair, finally spoke up, and his words shook everything. "I've seen Jungkook delete messages from Taehyung," Jimin said. His voice was quiet, but sharp as 9. It wasn't just once or twice. He knew Taehyung was under pressure. He knew how fragile he was back then. But Jungkook, you chose to remain silent. And worse, you choose to pretend to care in front of everyone. Jungkook is down. The only visible movement from him was an increasingly tight fist. But he did not argue. Say nothing. "Hyung, that's not true." His voice finally came out softly. "I just don't know what to behave like. I'm confused too, I'm tired too." Jimin cut him off. "Then why did you choose to meet HYB secretly? Why are you planning a solo promotion even when we're all trying to keep this togetherness intact?" Silence enveloped the room. Even the genie, who usually mediated, did not dare to intervene. Taehyung just stared at the floor. Her hand plays with the small bracelet Jungkook gave her years ago. The army knew the bracelet. They called it the promise bracelet. The friendship bracelet that Taehyung and Jungkook used to make when they were rookies. They swore they would never let him go, not even to sleep. But that night, slowly, Taehyung let go, and when the bracelet fell to the floor, his little voice sounded much louder than anything. "You're no longer the one who made that promise with me," Taehyung muttered, almost inaudibly. Jungkook turned his head quickly, his eyes red. He stood up, stepped towards Taehyung, but did not have time to speak because Taehyung had stood up first, took his jacket, and... The next night became the longest night that all BTS members had felt since they entered the military camp. Not only because of the tension that has not subsided, but also because the whisper of the past is back. And that night, it was RM and Suga's turn to finally speak up. RM sat in the middle of a small hall where they usually worked out a mental strategy together. But this time, it wasn't strategy that was discussed. What is discussed is a split that is slowly beginning to creep into their trust gap. When I started BTS, I was just a young boy who liked to write poetry on the wall. I don't have anyone. Until you came along, and we were all family. But now, this family is fractured. And I just want to know, is this one person's fault? Or is it because we've all had wounds that we've never treated for too long? No one answered. But from everyone's gazes, it was clear that the question hit them right in the chest. And the hardest hit was Jimin. Suga, who is usually calm, suddenly put his little notepad on the table. "I know you guys feel like all of this is just breaking right now. But you forgot, this whole thing started before we went into the military." He looked at Jungkook. "Remember when you ran away from vocal training and said you wanted to be alone? That was the first time I saw Taehyung crying quietly in the studio bathroom. Not because you weren't present, but because you didn't tell anyone." Jungkook closed his lips. Even his breath was trying to be held so as not to sound vibrating. Jimin looked at Suga with pleading eyes as if asking, "Don't bring that up now, but it's too late." Because one by one, the old stories that they had only kept in the darkest room of their hearts began to be dismantled. And the biggest story came from Jimin himself. With a voice that almost broke, Jimin finally said something that even ARMY had never heard in their lifetime following BTS. "Do you remember why Jungkook and I didn't talk to each other for 3 weeks during our trainee days?" he said, looking straight at the floor. "It's because I caught him write a letter out of BTS." The whole room fell silent. Even Taehyung, who had chosen to stand in the corner of the room, took a step closer to the center of the circle. At the time, he didn't feel good enough. He doesn't feel like a part of us. He was afraid of being called a failure. And when I tried to restrain him, he said, "I'm too organized." Tears began to fall from Jimin's eyes. "Jungkook is not just a brother to me. He's the person I trust the most." But after that night, that trust began to crack. I hide my feelings. I keep smiling, keep laughing, keep hugging him in front of the camera. But behind the scenes, I'm scared. Afraid he'll leave again, this time, quietly, without letters. Jungkook stood up from his chair. He walked slowly towards Jimin, then knelt in front of him. Not to show weakness, but for one thing, apologize. "Hyung,
I'm stupid.
I'm a coward, and I know I hurt you, but I don't know where to start to fix it." And just then, the sound of footsteps was heard from the hallway. Jin entered, dressed in full military clothes, with a different expression than usual.
No smiles.
There is no firmness. Only calm saves the storm. "I'm new from the staff room," he said briefly. "HYB already knows everything." Everyone turned their heads. Jimin nodded. Taehyung clenched his fists, and Jungkook could only swallow with difficulty. "They are considering postponing the group's comeback until this conflict is over," Jin continued. "And they asked one thing. Do BTS still want to remain one?" That question hangs in the air. It was as if the whole world was waiting for an answer. RM looked at Jin, then said quietly, "That's not a question that can be answered right now. But we will look for the answer together, even if we have to reveal everything, including what we have been hiding." Jin nodded, but before he left the room, he turned and looked at Jungkook. "And you, we need to talk. alone. Behind the private conversation, a CCTV recording was leaked to one of the fanbase's accounts. The footage shows Jungkook and a formally dressed man, allegedly HYB's staffer, meeting secretly 2 days before departure for the camp. In the footage, Jungkook appears to be handing out something that looks like a letter